Where bombs fall, faith rises. That's not just a phrase. It's a truth I witnessed with my own eyes, and it changed me forever. In the heart of Gaza, where the air hums with the sound of drones and distant shelling, where concrete crumbles under the weight of war, you'd expect to find only fear. Only silence, only the remains of what once was. But what I found was faith. Not the quiet kind you keep to yourself. Not the comfortable kind we speak about when life is good. I'm talking about the kind that rises, loud, defiant, and unshaken. In the middle of chaos, I met a father there, his home reduced to ruins, his livelihood shattered. But when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see defeat. I saw clarity, I saw power, I saw peace. He wasn't holding on to faith because he had no other choice. He was holding on to it because it was all that made sense. He said to me, the world can take everything, but not our belief, not our connection to God. That hit me like nothing ever has. You see, where I come from, faith is often wrapped in comfort. We pray when we're grateful. We call on God when things go wrong, sure. But it's different. There's always a backup plan, a safety net. But in Gaza, for that family, there was nothing left, nothing but faith. And yet, they were still standing. I watched a mother sing her baby to sleep under a sky that could turn deadly any minute. Not a flicker of fear in her voice, just warmth, just love, just unshakable belief that something greater was watching over them. And in that moment, I understood something I never could have grasped before. Faith isn't about escaping the storm. It's about dancing in the rain with your eyes on heaven. The boy, 8 years old, barefoot, dusty, hungry, he smiled at me, offered me a piece of bread from the little they had. No hesitation, no questions, just kindness, just purity. I asked him if he was scared. He said, sometimes, but I know Allah is with us. That one sentence silenced everything inside me. It rewired something in my spirit. They weren't surviving. They were living, and not in spite of their situation, but because of something deeper, something invisible, something eternal. The world had taken their homes, their schools, their dreams, but it couldn't touch their hearts. Couldn't touch what was real inside them. I sat with them through the night, hearing their stories, watching their faces lit only by a flickering candle. No electricity, no running water, and still they laughed. They prayed, they hoped, and with every smile, every whispered Inshallah. Their faith rose like smoke from the ashes, unseen but undeniable. That night, I learned that faith is not about what you have. It's about what you hold on to when everything else is gone. In the middle of war, I found peace. In the wreckage of lives, I found purpose. In the face of destruction, I saw creation, a strength of spirit that no army could break. So now, when life gets heavy, when things fall apart, I remember that family. I remember that child's smile, and I remind myself, where bombs fall, faith rises, and that rise is more powerful than anything that could ever fall. In broken walls, I found unbreakable strength. That sentence lives in my bones now. Before I walked into Gaza, I thought I understood strength. I thought strength was loud, commanding, something seen in the eyes of soldiers or on the faces of champions. I thought it came with armor, with power, with control. But all that changed the moment I stepped through what used to be the doorway of a shattered home, and found something more powerful than anything I had ever known: resilience. The walls were cracked and scorched, their edges jagged like open wounds. Pieces of ceiling had caved in, the floor was covered in dust and memory. And yet, in the center of that ruin, a family sat together. No roof above them, but still a roof over their spirit. The father welcomed me with a quiet nod and a calm smile. His hands, rough from labor and grief, offered me a seat as if we were sitting in a palace. His wife poured tea from a chipped pot, careful, precise, graceful, like nothing was broken around her. I asked them how they managed to live like this, how they kept going. The father said, "These walls, they've seen pain, but they've also seen prayers, laughter, love. We are still here. That's our strength." I looked around and I realized that strength wasn't about muscle. It wasn't about power. It was about presence. It was about standing tall when everything around you has fallen. That's what they were doing. That's what I was witnessing. The children were playing with a homemade soccer ball. Just plastic bags tied together with string. No shoes, no grass, just dirt. And yet their laughter echoed through the broken streets like a song of defiance. They weren't ignoring the destruction. They were choosing joy in spite of it. That is strength. There was a photo frame still hanging on a piece of wall, slightly tilted, covered in dust. A family portrait, taken before the war, same smiles, same eyes, but everything else had changed. I asked if they ever thought about leaving. The mother shook her head and said, "This is our land, our story. You don't run from a wound. You heal it." And it hit me. Healing doesn't mean things look perfect again. Sometimes healing means you become the strength the world forgot to give you. Sometimes it means you carry the weight with a smile, with a prayer, with quiet courage no one sees but everyone feels. That broken home stood because they stood. And in that moment I felt small. Not in a bad way, but in the kind of way that humbles you. That reminds you what really matters. They had no security, no comfort, no certainty. But what they did have was each other. And in their connection, in their love, in their faith, they were stronger than any building, stronger than any army, stronger than any tragedy that had tried to bury them. As I left, the father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't look at what's broken. Look at what's still standing." Now, whenever I feel overwhelmed, whenever I think I've got it tough, I go back to that moment. I go back to that cracked wall and that proud family. In broken walls, I found unbreakable strength. And that kind of strength, it lives forever. They had nothing, yet gave me everything. That's a sentence I used to hear in stories, something people said in movies or books. But I never understood its depth until I met that family in Gaza, until I saw what it really means to have nothing and still live with open hands and an open heart. Their home was barely standing. Pieces of the roof were gone. The walls bore the marks of violence and time. The air was thick with dust, and yet there was warmth in that space. A kind of warmth you don't get from heaters or lights. A warmth that comes from people who choose kindness, even when life has been cruel to them. They didn't know me. I was a stranger, walking into their lives with shoes that hadn't touched suffering like theirs. But they welcomed me like family. The father smiled, stood up, and motioned for me to sit on the only intact cushion in the room. His wife offered me tea, sweetened with just a little sugar, because that's all they had left. She apologized that it wasn't much, but to me, it was everything. It was generosity in its purest form. I looked around and saw their children sitting quietly, observing me with curious, kind eyes. One of the boys reached into his pocket and pulled out a small toy, worn out, missing pieces, and placed it in my hand. "For you," he said. I was stunned. That toy might have been the only one he owned, and still he wanted to share it. Not because I needed it, but because he had love to give, that kind of giving. It shatters your pride. It humbles your soul. Because these people who had lost so much weren't focused on what they didn't have. They were focused on what they could give. Time, hospitality, a smile, a story, a piece of bread. We shared a meal, flatbread, olives, and a little oil. That's it. But it felt like a feast, because every bite was served with dignity. With gratitude, with love. They didn't pity themselves. They didn't complain. They were thankful. Thankful that they were alive. Thankful for each other. Thankful that they could still give something of themselves, no matter how small it seemed. I remember the father saying, "When you give from the heart, nothing is ever small." That stayed with me, because in that moment I realized they hadn't given me food or comfort. They had given me a piece of their spirit. They had shown me that abundance isn't about what's in your hands. It's about what's in your heart. They didn't need to give, but they did. They chose to. They saw a guest, and they honored me in a way no expensive hotel ever could. They gave me the kind of welcome that money can't buy. The kind of compassion that doesn't come from having everything, but from understanding what it means to lose. and choosing love anyway. I left that home different. I left carrying more than I came with, and not in my hands, but in my soul, because that family reminded me of something the world often forgets. The most powerful gift is not what you give from your wealth, but what you give despite your lack. They had nothing, yet gave me everything, and that gift will stay with me for the rest of my life. Love louder than war, hope stronger than fear. That's what I saw in Gaza, not a headline, not a statistic, but real people living through the unimaginable and still holding on to something the world couldn't take from them. It was louder than the bombs, louder than the fear, louder than the silence the world often gives them. I remember walking down a dusty street, buildings half gone, windows shattered, the sky gray with smoke and dust. You could feel the weight in the air, not just from the war, but from the grief that lived in every corner, every broken brick. And yet I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a place like that. Laughter, the sound of children chasing each other through alleys, making toys out of scraps, turning the ruins into a playground. That laughter, that was love, that was hope. I stood there, stunned, as a little girl ran past me, her hair wild in the wind, her smile even wilder. Her mother, sitting nearby with her baby in her arms, looked up at me and smiled too. A real smile, not forced, not broken. She held her baby close and said something I'll never forget. We teach them to love even here, especially here. I sat with that family later that day. Their home barely had 4 standing walls, but they made space for me. Shared stories, shared food, shared life, and in the middle of war, they still made time for love. The father told me we could choose to hate, we could choose to be bitter, but then we've already lost, so we choose love, we choose hope. How does someone choose love in the middle of destruction? That question echoed in my mind all night, because here's what I realized: love isn't weak, hope isn't blind. These things, love and hope, they're acts of rebellion, they're choices, powerful, deliberate choices. When everything around you says give up, but you keep reaching for light, that's strength most of us will never understand. I watched how they spoke to each other, how they held on to each other like lifelines. The kids clung to their parents, not out of fear, but because they felt safe in their arms, even when nothing else was safe. They prayed together, ate together, cried and laughed together. They created a world inside their home that war couldn't touch. Hope lived in every word they spoke, not false hope, not empty optimism, but faith. The belief that something better can come even if they'll never see it themselves. And love was the glue holding it all together. The mother who still sang to her baby, the father who told bedtime stories over candlelight, the grandmother who taught the kids to pray, not for revenge, but for peace. It made me look at my own life differently. All the things I worry about, complain about, fear, none of it compares. These people had every reason to hate, to scream, to fall apart, but they didn't. They held each other tighter. They loved louder. They hoped harder, and it taught me something no book, no speech, no classroom ever could. That real power doesn't come from a weapon. It doesn't come from a government or a flag. Real power comes from the human spirit that chooses light over darkness. That chooses to love not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Love louder than war, hope stronger than fear. That's what I saw in Gaza, and that's what changed me forever. One family, one night, a lifetime of lessons. That's all it took. Just a few hours with people I didn't know before, in a place the world often forgets, to completely change the way I see life, pain, gratitude, and what it means to truly love. I didn't go there looking for anything. I was just passing through, trying to understand, trying to witness. But what I found that night wasn't just a family living in the middle of chaos. It was truth. Pure, raw, unfiltered truth wrapped in kindness and struggle. Their home was barely a structure. The walls stood because they had to. The roof was patched with plastic sheets and hope. And yet, when I stepped in, I was treated like royalty. The father welcomed me like I was one of his own. His eyes were tired but calm. You could tell they'd seen too much. His hands were strong, hands that had carried children, rebuilt walls, buried loved ones. But when he shook mine, there was no bitterness, only grace. He motioned for me to sit on the floor where a small, worn-out rug was laid. It wasn't much, but they had made it something. His wife was already preparing tea. She moved with purpose, dignity, not once apologizing for the humble setting. And she didn't need to. In that space, love was the luxury. Her children sat close to her. The youngest one clinging to her arm like it was his whole world. And maybe it was. Because even though the walls around them were crumbling, she made them feel safe. She made that house a home. We talked for hours. They told me stories, stories of loss, of survival, of choosing to smile when there's every reason not to. They didn't speak in dramatic tones. They spoke softly, like this was just life. Like pain had become a familiar guest, but hope was still sitting at the table too. I listened quietly. I didn't have much to say. What could I offer them, really? I was the one being fed, being taught, being humbled. The father told me how he used to be a teacher before the war, how he missed his classroom, his students, but now his classroom was his home, and his students were his kids. He was still teaching how to be strong, how to stay kind, how to believe in something bigger than the pain. And he said something I'll never forget. If I give up, they give up, and I can't let that happen. That night, they gave me more than tea, more than shelter. They gave me perspective. They gave me a mirror to look into. And I didn't always like what I saw. I saw how easily I complain, how quickly I forget to be thankful, how often I let small things ruin big days. But this family, they had lost so much, and still found ways to give, to love, to laugh. As I stood to leave, the little boy ran up to me and gave me a small stone he had painted. Just a circle with a heart drawn on it in red. He said, "So you remember us." I still have that stone because I do remember every day, one family, one night, a lifetime of lessons, and I carry those lessons with me wherever I go. Gaza didn't break them. It built something divine. That's the truth I came to understand after standing in the ruins of what once was a home and witnessing the unshakable spirit of the family living inside. You hear stories, you see news reports, but nothing prepares you for the moment you see it with your own eyes. What war does to a place, to a people, and more importantly, what it can't do. The destruction was everywhere. Streets lined with crumbled buildings, windows shattered, walls scorched by fire and fear. It looked like the end of everything, but then I stepped into one small house, barely a house really, and found the beginning of something extraordinary. A man, his wife, their children, living in what was left, holding on to what still mattered. They had no luxury, no peace, no promise of safety, but what they did have was something sacred. I watched the father move through the house like a man not defeated, but defined. He didn't carry his pain like a burden, he carried it like a badge. Every crack in the wall, every scar on his hands, every line on his face, those weren't signs of weakness. They were proof of survival. And not just survival, but purpose. He told me this place tried to crush us, but it made us stronger, it made us grateful, it made us closer to God. His wife echoed the same strength. She didn't complain. Not once. Instead, she held her baby with a quiet calm that spoke louder than any words. She served me tea with hands that had comforted children in the middle of airstrikes, that had rebuilt meals from scraps, that had wiped away tears not just from her own eyes, but from others. She had lost so much, but she still gave like she had everything, and in her presence I felt something holy, something untouched by all the destruction around us. The children were full of light, not because they didn't understand what was happening, but because they refused to let it steal their spirit. One of them showed me a drawing he'd made on the back of a torn piece of cardboard, a house, a son, his family holding hands. When I asked him why he drew that, he said, "Because that's what I see when I close my eyes." That's not just innocence, that's faith, that's vision. That's resilience born in the fire of suffering and shaped by something eternal. As I sat with them that night, I realized that the war hadn't destroyed them. It had refined them. Pain hadn't made them bitter. It had made them wise. Fear hadn't made them cold. It had made them more compassionate. Everything the world tried to take from them only brought them closer to something divine, a deeper love, a deeper faith, a deeper connection to the essence of what it means to be human. They weren't broken. They were reborn. Every loss had become a reason to hold each other tighter. Every dark night a chance to light another candle. Every time the world pushed them down, they stood up stronger, not just for themselves, but for each other. For their children, for something greater than survival. I came to Gaza thinking I would see pain, and I did. But what I didn't expect to find was beauty, not the kind you see, but the kind you feel, the kind that lingers long after you leave, the kind that teaches you what strength really is. Gaza didn't break them. It built something divine, and that divine light still burns, even in the darkest corners of the world.